Hey there, my friends. It's another Wednesday. I'm Mary Rose Wood. I am here live to chat with you about writing craft, story structure, and whatever questions you glorious storytellers have for me today. It's so good to be here with you. If you're watching from the Path of the Storyteller Facebook group, pardon me, would you do me the courtesy of going to streamyard.com/Facebook and give permission to show your name so that I know who's here? It's just one of those things. Technology asks of us. It gives us a lot, so we have to play along. Technology has its own rules. Today, my friends, we are going to talk about the middle. Now, I'm not pointing out anything about muffin tops or saddlebag. We're not talking about our middles. If you have issues with your middle, that's between you and your middle. I'm talking about the middles of our stories. Now, this is a topic I'm very grateful to one of my Path of the Storyteller students, Chris. Hey, Chris, if you're out there, for asking a question about the middle and asking me to talk about it a little bit, because it is the middle is the place where like good writers get lost. It's too often the place where our protagonists get lost. Why is it so tricky? What is so difficult about the middle? I hope that you'll leave comments and help me deepen this conversation to suit the questions that come up in your writing so we can solve some of your problems, all right? So what is the middle? What is the middle? Well, it's the part between the beginning and the end. That much is correct. But it's also the most of your book. It's the longest part of your story. Your tale, if it's got some decent story structure about it, is more than half middle. Rough proportions, this isn't a formula, but it is a proportion that your readers will intuitively expect, is to have a beginning that is no more than 20 to 25% of the story, and then a middle that's 50%, maybe a little more, and then again an ending that is about 20 to 25%. Your beginning can be swifter than that. Some beginnings start very swiftly. But if you take more than 20 to 25%, your reader is going to start to be curious, what is this story about? It's off to too slow a beginning. So you see there from that simple math, writer math, that the middle is where we're going to spend most of the story. In fact, the middle is, in a sense, what we're promising. It's what we're delivering. It's the bulk of the tale. And yet it's so mysterious, right? Let's talk about that. I want to go through what I think, what a middle is when done well, what the two biggest pitfalls are when writing a middle, and some solutions to those problems. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Let me just take a moment to say hi to the folks who are here live. Hey, Terry, it's good to see you. I see there's some others here as well. So yeah, please share your issues, your middle issues. If you're a middle child, that too can cause issues. That is not what we're here to talk about today. I wish I could solve all your middle problems, but I can't. Just storytelling. Hey, Nancy, great to see you here today. Just so you guys know, I am getting sometimes an issue, a little error message from Facebook that they are having problems today. So if you have trouble seeing this, then we're going to have to pivot to YouTube. So please feel free to do that. That is not an issue with me. But unfortunately, we're going to have to restart on Facebook. Let me end this. We're going to restart. I know YouTube folks, hang on one second. We just lost all the Facebook people. So I'm going to, hopefully they'll have the sense to come over to YouTube. So there's nothing I can do about that. So back to talking about the middle. It is most of the book. And why is it so tricky, right? A lot of us start our stories with an idea of the beginning. Oh, I'm going to start a story about a character who, who's in this predicament. That's like a classic beginning type inspiration. We might not know too much, but we have a sense of a character in a predicament. This is a wonderful way to start a story. You can't really start a story without them, without having that impulse of a character in a predicament. And those lucky enough to also get an idea for where that character is going, what the ending might be like. These are the blessed ones indeed, because they have an idea about a character in a predicament, and they also have a sense of how it all turns out. Those are, important lines to draw, right? Little markers. You have a starting line, you have a finish line. What is not always so easy to get in a flash of inspiration or an intuition about how it all ends up. It's kind of like a starting photo and an ending photo, right? So what we don't see with that is the process, the dynamic process of how we get from that image of how it all starts to that image of where it all ends up. It is not a still photo. The middle is a dynamic process, and it has so much in it. So what do we do? Some writers feel that there's nothing to be done about it, but to just start writing, and in the middle, you'll figure out what happens in the middle. But I think we all know what can happen if we just take that approach. Our desire to keep going, to put words on the page, to just keep inventing scenes and experiences can take us into dead ends. We can write ourselves into corners. We can lose track of the plot. We can find ourselves not really knowing what to do next. And so we invent new problems. We add new characters. We just kind of keep riffing on scenarios that we maybe already have explored. This is very diligent, and it's certainly great to keep going. But if you are in that kind of spinning my wheels through the middle mode, you are running the risk of really running out of steam. And then things dry up, and then we don't know what to do. We start to lose confidence in the project. We ourselves realize that we're just treading water. It's not getting better. It's just getting longer. And we're eventually going to run out of ideas. We're not getting any closer to the finish line, right? So that is what happens sometimes when we just, improv our way through a middle without a strategy. The other thing that can happen is that we get into the middle and we sort of skip right to the end. Our hero is ready for the adventure's conclusion, almost at the moment that it begins. And we're so eager to write how it all ends up that we just kind of zoom ahead. And we realize that our book is too short and that it doesn't have much in the middle. So these are the two symptoms of an insufficient strategy about how to deal with the middle. So if any of that, feels a little familiar to you, stay tuned. What's supposed to happen in the middle? I think of the middle as the transformation zone. What do I mean by that? If you've been watching these videos, you know that I teach that story is a means of depicting transformation. It shows the journey of change, of meaningful, irrevocable change for a protagonist. Where does that change happen? A little change might happen in the beginning, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And certainly some transformation is going to find its fullest expression in the end. And I'm just going to pause now because I'm getting a little feedback from Terry. Thanks for clearing that up, Terry. Yeah, Facebook feed crashed. You'll be able to watch the replay, but if you want to participate live, hop on over to YouTube. Okay, that's where we're live now. Exciting. Temporal shifts, changes in the time-space continuum. It's so cool. Thanks for sharing that, Terry. For those of you who are wondering, where did it all go? So when I'm talking about the middle, I'm talking about the middle as the transformation zone. All right. So it's where the change happens. Well, we all know that change doesn't happen at random. Most of us are resistant to change. Most of us are where we are at the moment in our lives for good reason. We have the limiting beliefs we have the circumstances we have. It's what is. That's where we find ourselves. If we could wave a magic wand and change everything, we would. It's not simple. And yet, our stories are designed to depict not only change, but the great adventure of change in our heroes' lives, the change that brings them into some kind of fulfillment of their true destiny, the long postponed necessary spiritual growth that's going to get them out of being stuck. Um, a big transformation in their condition from someone who has a wound that's never healed to someone who has resolution, who integrates parts of their psyche that they have long been in denial about. This all sounds very heady, but if you think about the stories, even simple stories that you might know well, that this is what stories are about. Charlotte's Web, which is a suitable book to hand a third grader, is about nothing less than mortality and what makes life worth living. The answer of that marvelous small tome of wisdom is, friendship. Friendship is what makes life worth living, and the importance of leaving a legacy, generations yet to come. That's all in Charlotte's Web. You want to talk about other books, you can easily find examples of these big ideas. These are the types of transformation that stories depict. They're not about a person has a job they didn't like, and 350 pages later, they have a job they like better. That's a change, but it's not a transformation. All right. So this matters because the middle is where this transformation is going to happen. And if your vision of the type of change that your hero is going to undertake is limited, if it's trivial, how are you going to fill up a middle? Like, oh, and then she wrote her resume, and then she went on an interview. The first job she didn't get, the second one she did. First day at the new job and fade out. No offense, but really, who cares? That's not enough of a story, right? That's not enough. And so no wonder you can't think your way through the middle. So one of the first things we have to consider is this need for transformation in the hero substantial enough to be a story? All right, that's the first thing I want you to think about. Is the journey of change deep enough, meaningful enough? Now, external change is not the only kind. A person might end up a story with a different job than they had at the beginning. That's the external circumstance. But if the mechanism of transformation on the inside involved a reevaluation of their priorities in their lives, if they've decided to, abandon an abusive relationship and a limiting sense of what they deserve, and go to Tuscany and fall in love and renovate a house, change the whole thing. Yeah, they're going to end up with a different job at the end, but that's not the point. The point is that internal transformation, the sense of self, the identity shift is the transformation. So your external circumstances are one indicator, a way of dramatizing, if you will, the transformation. But the true meaning of your tale is going to be the transformation that happens on the inside of your hero. So this puts us in a situation where we really need to know. We need to know fairly early on. We need to know in the first act. Not every single thing that happens to our hero for the whole book, but we need to be in touch with what that internal change wants to be. Do they need to, grow into their power? Do they need to learn to connect to other people? What kind of story is this? What does the change look like? Once you get in touch with that, the invention of how that will be depicted in the book becomes a lot easier because it's no longer random. It's what I call an adventure that rises organically from the deep need for change of the hero. It is the bespoke suit of adventure that the storytelling gods have designed for this character and this character alone. I call that the mission. So your number one prescription for solving the problem of the middle, when you are inclined to let your hero and your story wander without a plan, is to go back a little bit to your first act and make sure that you know what your hero's mission is, externally and internally. All right? It's more important that you know what it is internally than you know what it is externally, because it's that internal transformation that ultimately is what your story is about, and that's what the reader is going to be there for. So that's one of our red flags. The writer who's traipsing through the middle or trying to, but they don't know what the mission is. That will manifest in all of the kinds of wandering and exploratory scenes and random digressions and invention of fresh scenarios and retreading of material and randomly adding characters that seem all too often to be more interesting than your protagonist. Your protagonist, in a middle with no mission, your protagonist is he's just a tourist, right? She's just wandering around looking for entertainment because the writer doesn't have a plan. Your hero needs a mission. So that is my recommendation, number one. So what about the other writers? The writers who write their way through some kind of beginning that establishes the hero's world. And yeah, there's some kind of problem and they have this great idea for some climactic scene and how it ends. Like they just know, they have an impulse. They know how it ends. They have a vision for how they want it to end. What can we do with those writers? They get into their second act and they're just ready to write the end. Well, think about it for a second. If the vision you have for the ending of your story is available to your hero without much preparation, if it's something they're capable of without going through a big change, then either it is the wrong mission, it's much too easy, it doesn't demand enough of your hero, or you have not placed your hero in enough of a pickle in the beginning. There needs to be a gap between what your hero is capable of at the beginning of the story and what they are capable of at the end. The mission that you invent for your hero must seem unattainable. They could never do it. It's so out of character. It's the last thing that they would be able to do when we meet them. They're not prepared. They're not that vulnerable. They're not that brave. They're not that confident. Maybe they're too confident. Maybe they're bound by ego. They're unwilling to, be truthful with themselves. They're in denial about something. What's bugging your hero at the beginning? What's the problem? What's their issue? If you find yourself, and I'm going to just say, this is an intuitive leap that I'm making just as someone who's written a lot and worked with a lot of developing writers. If you find yourself reluctant to give your hero enough of a complexity, enough limitation, enough obstacle at the beginning of the story, ask yourself if you yourself are identifying with the hero of your story to excess. Nobody wants to invent suffering. And if we invent a hero with whom we are identified, obviously we don't want them to suffer because we don't want to suffer, right? We want them to be our happy video game avatar going on adventures and having experiences that we can't have. We're playing in the realm of wish fulfillment. All right, that's not a story. Your hero needs to need a story. Your hero has to be in a place of need at the beginning, whether they realize it or not. They may, like Bilbo Baggins, be trotting along quite contentedly to all appearances. They may, like Ebenezer Scrooge, not think that they are the problem. They think everyone else is the problem. But these are characters who, at the beginning of their respective tales, are in deep need of transformation. They are not in a good way, whether they know it or not. The storyteller knows it. And believe me, if you do your job, the reader will know it too. There's no reader who starts to read A Christmas Carol and gets a glimpse of Ebenezer Scrooge and says, oh, well, he's fine. He's a thriving businessman. He's certainly well off, right? No problems there. Of course we know. The author makes sure that we know that although Ebenezer Scrooge is not complaining himself about his own condition, he's a mess. He's broken. His spirit is in dire need of transformation. So that's what we have to do. We have to disconnect our avatar connection with our main character so that we can think of them as an entity who has a problem, whether they know it or not. Now we've got some space. Now we've created a gap between who they are at the beginning of the tale and who they must become at the end. What connects that gap? What lets us cross that gap to who they were and between who they were and who they must be? That, my friends, is the middle. It is the transformation zone. If your hero has a clear need, has some kind of mission, and there is a fair amount, a significant amount of transformation needed to get from the identity of the beginning to the identity of the end, your middle is a field ripe for the picking. Now what you have to do is put your hero in the process, the dynamic process of transformation, which only happens in increments. It doesn't happen all at once. Scene after scene after scene, challenges come. And at the beginning of the middle, they're going to be smaller challenges than they are at the end. Why? Because your hero is growing. They're going to get the hardest thing that they can cope with at every stage of the journey, right? But that's going to change as they develop. We call these the tests, that the middle is a series of escalating tests. But that sounds a little repetitive, right? And what I want you to think about as you brainstorm the tests is, if your hero knows what their mission is, and they must, to get into the middle, what is the next logical step for them to take that is going to bring them closer to the goal? What is it that they must do? It's going to be different depending on what you decide the mission is, what the hero's goal is. So I can't tell you, well, the first thing they'll do is check a map, and the second thing they'll do is buy provisions, and the third thing they'll do is, find someone to feed their cats while they're away having an adventure, But the truth is that they're going to have a series of things they have to do. They're going to have an objective, and they're going to take steps to get closer to it. It's possible that some of the steps that they have to take may not be to their liking. It's quite likely that they'll be horrified by some of the things that they realize they must do and fight kicking and screaming and go through lots of objection and need mentor energy to come in to help them. But there can't be too much of that in the middle. Otherwise, we have a hero who is passive and reluctant, and the energy of the forward drive of the story is going to end up migrating to other characters. We don't want that. We want your hero to struggle, yes, to be afraid, perhaps, to lack confidence, certainly, but in a way that can be dealt with. Each iteration of getting over that threshold of resistance is growth, just as it is for each of us as we face things that make us uncomfortable. So your scenes in the second act are going to have this quality of being the next logical thing that your hero must do in order to get closer to achieving their mission. As a consequence, they will grow bit by bit into the kind of person who may in fact pull it off at the end. But it has to seem way out of reach at the beginning. Otherwise, it's too easy. So once you've thought about what the next logical step is, here's another question. What's the worst thing that can happen? We can make a list of the next logical steps, but that's only going to work as long as nothing goes wrong. You all know we have to expect the unexpected in life. We have to prepare for contingencies. What's plan B? What's plan C? Your story is going to operate along those principles as well. Your hero is going to do the thing that they think is going to get them closer to the goal, and it may not be the right thing. It may backfire. It may have unintended consequences. It may be more than they can handle at that moment. Someone may try to trick them. Somebody might be standing in their way. Obstacles of all kinds can crop up to complicate their forward progress. So we have to say the hero is actively trying to do the next thing to take them toward their mission as they understand it at this stage of the game, but it's never going to be smooth sailing. And that's where the word tests has meaning. It's not like a quiz. It's not a written exam. It's just that each attempt to get closer to the goal is going to be beset with difficulties, and they will vary. There will be difficulties from the outside. There will be difficulties from the inside. You have a wonderful secondary cast of characters pouring archetypal energy into the story, and they can provide both encouragement and obstacles along the way. So you actually have a tremendous variety of ways to keep these tests not feeling the same. Just imagine your hero changing with each one, and now they need a test that suits who they've become. The same test repeated twice is not necessary because once they pass that test, they don't need to take that one again. They have leveled up. New things will happen. Complexities will arise. So that's the other key question. Now, when I say what's the worst thing that can happen, it's not generic. I remember many times doing visits in schools, chatting with kids about my books. And I would often, as an exercise in creativity and to teach them a little bit about the writing process, teach some kids, I'd have them volunteer and come up and teach them the yes and exercise, which is a really basic improv exercise. If anyone's ever done improv, you know the yes and exercise. You tell a story collaboratively. One person says what happens next, and the next person says yes and adds the next thing that happens, And there's always a kid in every group who will have an asteroid land on the face of the earth and kill everyone. And it always gets a big laugh. Like fourth graders find that hilarious. So I used to have to make a rule saying you're not allowed to kill off the entire story before everyone's had a turn to go. So when I say what's the worst thing that can happen, I'm not suggesting, oh, well, the worst thing that could happen would be, I don't know, an asteroid demolished the earth, right? There are stories about the fear of asteroids demolishing the earth. I'm not saying that that's not a means for a tale. It's not something that should never be in a story. But in your story, you're creating a bespoke suit of adventure designed to trigger the spiritual growth of your hero. It is a very unique circumstance. What is the worst thing that could happen to your hero at that moment in time, think about what your hero's wound is, what their need for change is. What is their Achilles heel? The worst thing that could happen to one person is not the same as the worst thing that could happen to another person. We all have different vulnerabilities, different fears, different places in life in which we particularly are on thin ice. And it may not even be visible to other people that we ourselves are now in a situation. Everyone else is having a great time, but there's something about this situation that is fraught in a special way for us and us alone. When your hero has that kind of specificity, when you know really deeply what your hero's need for change is, if you've done your first act work, your second act tests are going to have this inflection of being very grounded in that hero's particularity. So it's not just what's the worst thing that could happen. What is the worst thing that could happen to this hero at this moment? So if we bear that stuff in mind, know what the mission is, know what your hero's deep need for transformation is, ask yourself what they need to do as the next logical step to bring them closer to the mission, and then what can go wrong, you will find yourself able to start inventing scene after scene after scene in the middle, and each one is going to take you another step forward on the game board. All right? This is how we get through a middle. We don't lose sight of the destination. Your hero should know and your reader should know. All right? There's one thing about middles that is really helpful when you're finding your way through them. And that is to think about the shape of the middle as not just a flat line of this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, nor is it a line of just pure escalation. Things are bad, they get worse, they get worse, they get worse, they get worse, they get worse. Those types of lines are a little bit exhausting, right? They don't invite creativity. Think of your middle as having an oscillation, right? Peaks and little valleys that rise toward a midpoint, and then the amplitude, if you will, increases and the pace increases after the midpoint. So this is an issue of pacing, and middles have a certain type of special need for pacing because they should start to speed up after the midpoint. So let me just go a little deeper into what I mean by some of those terms. This waveform, this oscillation, the peaks of it are the moments when your hero is most challenged, really has to reach deep inside themselves to overcome some new obstacle. But the outcome is not always going to be the same. Sometimes they're going to have victory laps to run. Sometimes they're going to be utter defeat. Sometimes they're going to create a worse problem, right? By attempting to do something, they're going to end up in worse pickle. So you need to think about what the other piece of it is. Every scene, every attempt at growth your hero makes is going to have a consequence. And those consequences also give you space for variety. There's a type of scene that we love in second acts. We don't need to use it too often, right? But there's the occasional scene of resting and regrouping, thinking about what's already happened, making a strategy for what happens next, maybe getting some advice from allies or a mentor. Just as we do in life, we push ourselves to the breaking point and then we take a moment. And in those moments, sometimes is when we can, as readers, experience how much your hero has changed so far. Have they established a greater capacity for leadership? It might be in those moments that we can see them reflecting on that or see them acting on it. Have they found a different kind of a confidence? Are they themselves surprised at themselves? They can't believe what they just did. They're afraid of what's to come, right? So these moments of reflection, they don't have to be whole scenes, although sometimes they can be. But we're not always turning the crank of tension in this linear line all the way through the second act. That gets tedious for both writer and reader. So we can include this sense of like tough challenge, consequence, tougher challenge, consequence. And the midpoint, which comes, guess where? Right in the middle of the second act, can offer another special opportunity to lend shape to a second act so it doesn't have that feeling of just this long trudge across obstacles. And at a midpoint, you've got a couple of choices, but I want you to think about making that scene special in some way, that it has some sense of being a pivot point, right? When, a moment when things change. Your hero may discover the true stakes of their mission. They may not have realized how hard it was going to be or what was really at stake, or some new stakes may be added to their mission. They may find out that there's something about what they're trying to accomplish that is deeply personal that they didn't realize. They may have a moment of a false victory of some kind that immediately collapses and leaves them with a fresh, sobered understanding of what's to come. They may have a moment of despair. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to play with the midpoint, but what you want it to